definition of climate disclosure companies. This is getting quite serious now. It's starting to move obligations. It's not like this purely voluntary. A level scrutiny on that is going to be technical. So if you're not doing answers to those now, we'll do another one. In a lot of the issue, like the Europe now is having example of Europe and the US but they're I don't know. It's not 10. It's not. But if Granular
Great. Hello. You can hear me? We have 3 fans at least, or 4. Well, I'm Killian, Daly, Executive Director at EnergyTag. So we set standards for granular hourly energy tracking. And yeah, really looking forward to this panel today. Got to know all the panelists quite well yesterday, last night, and just before here as well. So really looking forward to the discussion. Fundamentally, what we're going to talk about is what is it to consume clean electricity? What is it today and what should it be tomorrow? I think we're also just like to raise that I think we're at an inflection point in these markets, in clean electricity markets. There's new regulations coming out around hydrogen. There's changes in carbon accounting standards upcoming that will, I think, revolutionize how we think about what it means to be zero carbon. And one of the core parts of that, I would argue the core part of all of this, is how we track and trace electricity. So today we use energy attribute certificates, which have served us over the last 2 decades, but they're quite coarse. Usually these markets work on annual matching of green electricity and over large geographical boundaries. At EnergyTag, like with a lot of the organizations here, we're focused on more granular tracking of electricity, so using granular certificates that are time-stamped. So you know the hour of electricity production. That comes with a number of benefits. We can have truly clean products like hydrogen. We have market signals for flexibility, which is really, really important. And all of this is, this movement towards like 24/7 CFE, which I think was covered really well by EPRI in the last presentation, is backed by like really strong empirical evidence, which is really important and hasn't always been the case. So IEA, TU Berlin, Princeton, MIT, they've all come out with like robust analysis showing, yes, we need to move these markets in this way. And I think, one of the key things now is how to do these granular certificates, how to do this granular electricity tracking. And I am delighted to welcome our panel of granular certificate experts and champions from around the world. Dr. Jemma Green from Powerledger, who's the co-founder there. And they, facilitate a lot of local energy trading, real-time trading of electricity and green attributes. Steve Tuckner from M-RETS, who's senior software engineer there. M-RETS is the largest, I think, REC platform in the world today, so EAC platform in the world. So they're one of the large incumbents, shall we say, and also one of the key advocates of granular tracking. And Samuel Cheptou from Granular Energy, who offer a range of services around 24/7 CFE. So, to get us started, I'd like to start with you, Jemma. Why are you excited about granular certificates and I think the role of more granular data in general in driving deep decarbonization?
Well, I think in the earlier days with companies and governments adding more renewables into the system, it didn't matter so much about how they went about it when you've only got 2, 3, 5% renewables in your grid. But what you can see now with large percentages of renewables in grids and the systems that we have for accounting things, that we're now getting a lot of oversupply of energy, curtailment. And also a lot of spend on networks and grids because energy generation is being built far away from load consumption. And there's a very strong positive correlation between high penetration of variable renewable energy and high electricity costs. And you can see that in all countries around the world that have grown renewables through subsidised feed-in tariffs. So it's led to really indiscriminate growth of renewables. As we want to get to higher percentages with net zero and hit bigger targets, it's become imperative that we co-locate renewable energy nearer to consumption and generate energy at the time when it's needed. So we deal with the time and the place problem. And why I'm excited about granular certificates is that it actually attends to that challenge. So it provides the information that's needed to create the price signal to encourage the right behaviour, which is going to grow renewables in a scalable way so that we'll hit the targets but without pushing up electricity prices. So it's an efficient way to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of that price signal element is one of around EnergyTag at the beginning of that was key. The price signals we have today are just like suboptimal. Green energy is priced on a monthly basis. Which it really doesn't send the signal for storage, and it doesn't send the signal for when you should consume at the right times and places. I think I'd like to ask yourself, Steve, as in let's say an incumbent, M-RETS has been around for a very long time, providing services in EACs. How do you manage this transition from EACs to granular certificates? How do you facilitate both markets without disrupting either one?
Carefully. So we have a lot of customers that at this point don't really care about hourly. And so we want to make sure that we introduce the feature in a way that is as seamless as possible and kind of let them dip their toe in it carefully and experiment and see how it works for them. So I mean, I think that's like a really important part of it, is just to also make it as understandable as possible to people who are just like coming on board.
Great. And I think, Samuel, like you guys are working on a lot of like portfolio management solutions for utilities, new ways of tracking certificates in a more fluid way, shall we say. How do you think about that? How will granular data help your customers drive decarbonization?
Yeah, good question. So I think basically we are like in kind of a weird system for too long now. We have like the energy industry from production to supply through trading and portfolio management that works with a very thin granularity, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 15, 5 minutes. And on the other hand, this accounting system to track green electricity across the grid, from specific assets to specific consumers, this tracking system is working with a very low definition approach, which is nowhere consistent with the physical reality of the grid. And basically now we have an opportunity to bring this tracking system closer in terms of time definition to the power system. And by having like a tracking approach from specific assets to specific consumers on a very thin time granularity, we have here an opportunity to basically unlock a lot of initiatives for decarbonation. So that goes from basically like flexibility monetization, demand response. I mean, once you have a price signal hour by hour, you are able to incentivize those behaviors that tend to better align consumption to production. And this is basically where we see the potential and the benefit of those granular certificates.
Great. And I think, you know, that, let's say, that alignment with the physical realities of the electricity system, we all know that it has to be balanced in real time. That will require better tracking. I think we've established that. In terms of how we get that done, maybe back to yourself, Steve, what would you say are the 3 key like tech challenges for you guys in implementing granular certificates, and the potential role also of open source initiatives like LF Energy in helping you resolve those tech challenges?
Sure. Like I sort of said on the sort of customer side, or like you'd say like the UI side, we want to make the integration seamless, you know, to we have users that use API, so we want to make sure that, you know, that the granular certificate tracking data fits into there very, very smoothly. And we also want to make sure that we can give the users the option of dealing with the data either as like an aggregate of granular certificates or as granular certificates themselves, and allowing you to retire sort of on the bottom end of the granular certificates or at the top end, and making sure there's no double counting between the two. And then the third one would be just dealing with the amount of data that, you know, there's going to be, you know, where we used to have 1 certificate for a month, now we're going to have 700 some certificates, and so that's going to be a huge expansion in the amount of data. And then when you start splitting those over and over, you know, it's going to really end up with a lot more data. So that'll be a challenge in itself. But even so, when you think about it, it's hardly, the amount of data that we have in our entire database is nothing compared to like 1 or 2 movies on Netflix. So it's not like, you know, I don't want to overemphasize it, like that's such a big challenge. And I guess you didn't say 4 things, but I did come up with a 4th. Yeah. And it's also pursuing standardization of granular certificates across the world, because as I've just learned in the past day, and we're doing some EnergyTag work together, that, you know, when you're creating, say, something like hydrogen from 24/7 electricity, you can put that hydrogen on a boat and you can send it anywhere. And then how are the certificates going to transfer across international boundaries and that sort of thing? So that's really, really interesting. Now, finally, It's just a long question. How do we use open source to help deal with this? So one of the things is acquiring good data. And like there was an earlier session today about protocols, about collecting meter data and open source definitions around that, and potentially APIs. I think that's going to be really important because we want to get near real-time data for hourly, whereas when we were dealing before it was monthly. So we're going to need to automate a lot more of our processes that are now done manually. I mean, a lot more. And then also, this is kind of a long shot, but potentially open sourcing parts of our own tracking system to allow places to set up tracking systems where there are none, and see what we could do with that.
Great. Yeah, I obviously fully agree on the need for standardization. We've also have an API spec at EnergyTag to make sure that as these granular certificate registries are developed, that folks can actually talk to them in the same way everywhere. Yeah, that's really, really important. And also the point about hydrogen, sustainable aviation fuels, whatever we're going to do in terms of producing products that need a lot of electricity and then potentially moving those products elsewhere, having common standards at the input for electricity to make sure the electricity is clean, following the same definitions, wherever that is produced. I think it's really, really important and another driver for standardization for sure. Thinking about that a little bit, maybe on the point hydrogen, some of the regulations, some of the money that is going to be doled out now for hourly matching in the future. How will rec markets, Jemma, how will they need to change compared to how they are today? How will they need to be modified? And how will they need to change to actually, live with this new reality? I used to buy recs before. It's a pretty high friction process. It's a lot of Excel files. It's not necessarily automated. What do you think needs to change there?
Well, there's a few things. The hourly information will need to be in the rec to start off with. So, and then you want an automated process to be able to, to purchase and settle those, physically and financially. And like a transparent market, so you can see prices where there's liquidity as well. So I think they're going to be very important ingredients. And then, what that provides is like an on-ramp for companies that don't necessarily want to purchase PPAs. So if a company, or they may have a PPA as well, but say, to purchase a PPA means you have to have a credit rating, and it's not that straightforward. So that might be a reason. So it provides the ability to purchase renewables matched against load profile without entering into a PPA. And then for those that do have PPAs, they may need to trim their excess or fill their gaps. And the certificate market provides them with a way to do that as well. So I think that's what it unlocks. But it will need to have those ingredients, I think, to be viable, because otherwise it'll only be very large companies that have, departments that can, actively manage all of this complexity and friction and whatnot. And also, it won't just be large companies. It would only be companies that have electricity as a lower input cost for the total cost of production, where there's less sensitivity to that. So tech companies, for example, whereas manufacturers that are more sensitive, they're less likely to embark on this journey.
Yeah. No, I fully agree. As coming from a company in heavy industry where electricity is over 50% of costs, it is a different equation there. Maybe just Samuel, just to touch on something that comes up a lot. I hear that hourly data doesn't exist. We can't really do this. All you guys are actually doing this right now, So I think just to try help dispel some of that, I think the data does exist. It's just about trying to get at it sometimes. So could you share a bit about how you set your customers up, how you interact with utilities to get the hourly data?
Yeah, sure. Maybe just before on the market question, I think. One important point, as I mentioned, if those two markets for the attribute and the power are converging in terms of time definition, there is an opportunity as well to rethink the market design of how we trade the attribute versus the power. On this, we've just released the past weeks white paper with Nord Pool, the power market operator in Europe. So Granular Energy, Nord Pool, and AFRI, and which basically explains how those two systems can work in parallel and in the end converge in a single market.
May I add something to that? Yeah, thanks for making that point. There's two things I wanted to say on that. One is, once you get to that level of like market that has a lot of granularity, like if you go from a 30-minute market to like a 5-minute market, you're going to have 6 times the amount of data. Mm-hmm. So that data piece is quite significant. But in terms of new market design, we're working in India in the state of Uttar Pradesh, which is the largest and most populous state there. It's got 225 million people living in it. And we did a demonstration peer-to-peer project, and they actually just changed the regulations to allow peer-to-peer trading across the whole state. And effectively what's happening is like a local energy market that is akin to the wholesale market. So there's a forward-facing market aspect to it. So batteries can bid to provide energy at a node, like at a substation or feeder. And so, you know, everyday citizens and businesses are able to participate in the local energy market, and it's having more granularity in terms of type, time and place, and also interacting with the grid constraints at the same time. So I think that those, you know, at the moment, you know, virtual power plants are very focused on energy in the wholesale market and ancillary services. But when you start rethinking things, then you start incorporating like network services in, and then co-optimization of the DERs. So, you know, if I've got a battery, I'm not just using it for self-supply, I'm also storing your excess solar in my battery and then giving it back to you later. So more efficiently using the existing resources. But yeah, I think you're going to need a new regulation and reconception of mechanisms to really get the most out of all of that.
Yeah, I think that notion of like, today we know what the green energy is on an annual basis, and we know what the grey energy is on a 15-minute basis. Like when we can marry those two together with the data, like there's a lot of interesting things I think that can be done in terms of electricity market design in general. So that's another exciting thing to look forward to. I do want to make sure we have plenty of time to have the audience ask some questions. So I'll open it up to you all if anyone would like to raise their hand. Yes, please. Yeah, so maybe I can touch on the policy part, and then I'll pass to you guys. I think on prosumers, on policy, we've seen like a number of evolutions, as was mentioned earlier. So in the United States, the federal government has a target for 50% 24/7 by 2030. So half of their load will have to be hourly matched. So that's a really big signal from the biggest electricity buyer in the world, I think, that they want things to move this way. In Europe, we've seen the European Commission come out with its definition for renewable hydrogen, which requires, by 2030, after a transition period, a fully granular accounting approach that would need granular energy certificates to prove that, you're getting green energy on an hourly basis to produce your green hydrogen, not on an annual basis, which basically means you're often fossil reliant. So, regulators are moving in this way quite fast. The UK government has the same rules for hydrogen, and the US government is in the process of drafting its own rules. Let's see what they do, but I'd certainly hope that goes in the same direction. So we've seen a lot of positive moves in terms of regulators recognizing that these green definitions, they need some updating, and also, they need some updating into a more granular type world that better represents the electricity system. In terms of prosumer remuneration, maybe yourself, Jemma, and then I pass on to Samuel and the rest of the panel.
I mean, it depends a little bit, but there are many markets where the feed-in tariff that customers are getting is lower than the wholesale price, so retailers are taking that as profit. So in that case, the answer is no, they're not being fairly compensated. And in terms of, like, say, the UK, for example, there's a big demand response program there going on where, you know, there's an event and people are paid money. So they're, you know, paid, you know, quite a lot to, you know, not turn on devices at night at a peak event. But for me, this is almost like a perverse market mechanism, because actually if you had the system where consumers were able to participate more readily day to day, then you might be able to avoid those kind of extreme events, more tail events that require a large payment to get a significant amount of behaviour change. So if you create a more transactive grid, you're constantly balancing supply and demand through price signals that are not just centralised through a wholesale market. So I think that's really important. But where you've got deregulated markets, where you've got like a retailer is different to the network operator, to the wholesale market, then you don't always have alignment of interest. So it's actually in countries like India where they're integrated, they actually have a more integrated mindset around how to solve the system issues. Whereas, like, for example, in Australia, they deregulated a lot of the markets. So the networks, even the retailers, they can't get the retailers to do what the networks need because it's not in their own individual interests.
Thanks. I know we're probably running short, so I would like to get more questions if there are some. Yeah, Hallie, please. Hi.
So one thing that we've seen recently in let's call it bad press, is carbon credit markets and potentially unbundled rec markets historically. And I have a two-part question, which is sometimes there can be conflation between a carbon credit market and a rec market, and how do we keep those clear, or should we? And then the second part is how do we maintain and ensure the credibility when building this new time-based market?
Maybe Sam, you could get that about.
Yeah, I can give it a try. Yeah, that's also a confusion that we find in a lot of our, I mean, not utility retailers, clients, they know those two concepts, but consumers, they might sometimes mix the two. And I mean, basically those two tools have been developed for different purposes. Now we find situations where they are used in the same, basically with the same goal, with the same approach. We were discussing, I think, earlier today about emissionality. I think this is typically like timestamp regs should be used to basically track how energy generation aligns with energy consumption, and as a tool basically to increase transparency and to attribute some green factors to an energy consumption. I don't think they should be mixed with the idea of replacing an offset for an investment in a carbon reducing technology. I think here we have an instrument that is to be used for the energy management and life cycle, basically during the lifetime of an asset. While the carbon credits, I think that's more an appropriate tool for investment moment. And I think those are like, it's the same as this capacity versus energy orientation. I think we should clearly disambiguate the two on that axis.
Anyone else like to jump in on that one?
Well, I mean, there's a big scandal that happened, I think, that Hallie was pointing to with Vera, and there'd been allegations of carbon credits being issued that had no basis behind them, and very large, fast-moving consumer brands had been purchasing them, and the CEO stepped down today. So I think that is going to be a catalyst for conversations around what is the right sort of technology and system to reduce fraud and incident. Like just before we came on stage, we were chatting about Ireland, and Killian's dad was buying a green renewable energy tariff until Killian spent 30 seconds explaining to his dad that there were credits that were coming from Denmark, I think, Norway, and he immediately said, "Oh, I'm just going to go back to buying like regular electricity," and it really underscores how important trust is to encourage participation in a system. And if you want behaviour change, it requires high levels of trust. And the more convoluted it is to understand, the less people are likely to participate in it in the first place. And then if it isn't designed well, then it's going to be fraught, and you're going to see unravellings and scandals and things like that, which will undermine progress as well. So I think we've really got to ask ourselves, not just, let's just do what we've always done technology-wise, but let's choose something that is actually fit for purpose, even if it takes us more time to wrap our heads around something new that will actually be fit for purpose in the biggest sense of the word.
Yeah, fully agree. And just one final point, I think it's like unbelievably important. We've seen it in the hydrogen debates. We need to always ask, what is the evidence for this approach? What's the empirical analysis? Who's done the analysis? Has it been peer reviewed or not? If we start basing markets on what a data provider wants to sell, and they're very convincing at selling that message, we're going to end up in trouble, basically. And we're going to end up, it might be me next or whatever as a fired executive director, right? You need to base things in evidence, especially today. I think do we have to wrap, or can we take one more question? We'll take one more. I think no one's stopping me. So is there any more questions?
Keep going.
Any final questions? No. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it there. So thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to the panelists for a great discussion, and looking forward to moving these markets more forward with you all. Thanks.